Great. So everyone, welcome to our cash seminar series. We're very excited for today. We have some folks trickling in the waiting room, and our wonderful admin help, Julia, will continue to kind of monitor that as folks trickle in. But I think we should get started so we can continue to have kind of some productive time and have a lot of time at the end here to have some Q&A with Dr. Yoon. And so, unless anybody has any major objections, I think I'll get started with a quick overview and introduction, and then I will pass it over to Dr. Yoon. All right, let's see here. First off, I just wanted to give a quick overview on CASH. So the Virtual Center for Aging, Health, and Environment aims to facilitate research and foster collaborations among a wide range of researchers working at the nexus of aging, health, environmental change, and related extreme weather events. We support targeted interdisciplinary training, facilitate resource sharing, and generally just promote investment and support in this type of research. I also want to mention that we have a lot of great resources on the CASH website, and we host this regular seminar series, which is meant to give a real under the hood look at the type of research that we get really excited about here at CASH. And so with that quick overview, I'll let everyone know that I'm excited to hear Dr. Liv Yoon speak today. She's an assistant professor at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada. Her research examines the intersections of climate change, social inequities, and health with a strong focus on community-engaged work. She approaches climate change as a socio-political crisis and explores how it can be used as an opportunity to challenge structural inequities. Dr. Yoon completed her postdoc training at Columbia University, during which she was a fellow with the New York City Panel on Climate Change and a member of Columbia's Environmental Justice and Climate Just Cities Network. Dr. Yoon, we are very excited to have you, and I will pass it over to you for the presentation.
Great, thank you, Alex. All right, I'll start by sharing my screen. Can everyone see my screen, the PowerPoint? Perfect, thank you. Okay, all right, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's August 19th. I feel like people are rushed to take their last vacations. And thank you to the CASH group for having me here. I'm really excited to share this under the hood side of doing this community engaged research on heat, housing, and health with seniors. I think most of you who are here are already familiar with CASH, know that this isn't like a research findings presentation, but more of like a what goes on behind the scenes tell all kind of talk, which is one of the reasons I was actually really interested in providing this, because I find that really just interesting. So yeah, I'm excited to share our story from our currently ongoing project, which is mixed methods, but mostly qualitative. I know that the abstract really emphasized the qualitative part. This is technically a mixed methods project. Most of it is qualitative, and I'll speak to both sides really. To begin, so let me acknowledge that this research takes place on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And simple things here. So I'm going to provide just a tiny bit of background to set the scene and about what's happened and what the project is, in order to talk about lessons currently being learned, about methods being chosen, and the data analysis that's currently ongoing. Okay. So again, this presentation isn't really about what we have found, but it's more about how we got here and how we are continuing to move forward, how the research process itself shaped what we are able to currently see. But let me provide a little bit of background so you have a sense of what our project is and why we're doing this in the first place. So I think many of you, especially in the US, have had it much worse this summer, but Canada, especially Western Canada, and actually down the coast, the Pacific coast of the US as well, in 2021, we experienced the heat dome, and this was record-breaking in all the ways. This is 2021, and at least 619 people died from heat-related causes that summer, just in the province of British Columbia, which is which is a stark figure. And that is a conservative estimate because ways to really know whether a death was caused by heat is not an exact science just yet. So people actually estimate the number to be much higher. So that is one event. At the same time, we also just know that it's getting hotter in general. Heat waves are increasing in frequency, intensity, duration, and just chronic heat also. It's not just like the acute heat events that we are paying attention to, but just the fact that people are just in hotter environments more and more. But we know that this heat isn't experienced equally, and from the 2021 heat dome, at least in BC, in this province, 98% of the people who died indoors, which is a stark figure. So, when we mostly think of heat, we think of outdoor temperatures, even the media, when they report it, it's like scenes of the beach and such. Really, I think what it should be is like people being wheeled out of their homes from in dilapidated housing, because that's where fatalities happen. And of course, home should be where people are most comfortable, but that is not the case. And just even beyond heat, we are focusing, the reason we are focusing on heat is because housing mediates people's ability to be safe and comfortable. And of course, older adults especially spend more time in their homes, and they're often framed as vulnerable to heat. But we're curious about what does vulnerability actually look like in people's everyday lives? And our project, we work with many different populations. Many are seniors, and I'll focus on seniors today, but we are also very much focused on tenants, so people who rent homes rather than who own homes, especially because that is most of our participants are low income and live in poverty, and we know that homes are also where you can kind of see that inequities manifest. So, but really, again, to bring us back, the presentation here is about the research process itself rather than the findings that we've been getting. Okay, so this is our project. It's funded by the Canadian government. We are focused on senior tenants and housing and heat and health. All right, so indoor environment again. So homes are where heat, so IEQ, indoor environmental quality, I'll be using this acronym frequently. They are intersecting and compounding issues. Again, 98% of deaths happened indoors, and most lived alone. And I should add actually another stat, which is about 70% of people who died were seniors during the heat zone as well. And I am a sociologist by training, and social inequities are a big focus. And again, material deprivation, social deprivation, we really see that manifest in housing, home environments. So this is our project in a snapshot. We have 4 objectives. So let's consider each an objective of its own. The first one here, this is a big focus on indoor environmental quality. So this is our most mixed methods objective, where we are looking at sensor data at IEQ, indoor environmental quality, and also we are measuring people's health metrics like sleep quality, heart rate variability through Fitbits, and we also have surveys, both quantitative and qualitative. Objective 2, we are installing cooling rooms in multi-unit residential buildings. I'm sure this is the case in many cities across the states. There are cooling centers, public cooling centers that people can access, but they're not actually accessible by many seniors, especially who have mobility challenges, or they're far away, inaccessible for various reasons. So we're actually trying to install cooling rooms by installing mechanical cooling in common areas, lounges of multi-unit residential buildings where senior tenants live, or do an evaluation of ones that already exist. So for that, it's more action oriented, and to evaluate, we're conducting interviews, and we're doing things like photo voice, which is where participants take photos and get to talk about their experience using the photos as prompts. And we also have more of like a document analysis type of objective, where we are looking at policies that currently exist in British Columbia, as well as media reports to look at what type of climate adaptation mitigation measures have unfolded since the heat dome, and think about what the implications of them are. And we are also trying to talk about these with actually stakeholders themselves, including decision makers. And our last objective is more interviews, again, with tenants about what their experience is like in housing that's not prepared yet for this heating climate. So as you can see, this, we have all sorts of methods across these four objectives. We can categorize them as quantitative and qualitative. I think we can also categorize them as more like getting data collection oriented versus action oriented. So things like implementing cooling rooms is more action and intervention oriented, and evaluating that at the same time as collecting data for what's currently going on. So we have different approaches and different ways to cut the pie for how to understand our methods right now. Okay, so across all four objectives and the methods that we're using, the core focus really is lived experience. And according to Dr. Zoe Hampstead, focusing on heat as opposed to temperature allows us to recognize that vulnerability is multifaceted, and that, for example, physiological vulnerability that mostly senior tenants are talked about as, that they are physiologically vulnerable, is not the only kind of vulnerability. And that older adults obviously are not homogeneously vulnerable. They're, even if it's physiological vulnerability does not look the same, living environments don't look the same. So we're really trying to recognize heterogeneity in many ways. And that's possible by focusing on lived experience. So for example, when we hear someone say, when it gets really hot, I just stay in my room, focusing on lived experience would mean that, we're not just checking this off as like, yes, they have an adaptation measure, but we actually inquire what this adaptation means to someone, whether it comes at a cost in the greater context of their life. So, we're not just simply asking older adults to confirm our existing categories of vulnerability or adaptation measure. We're trying to look at their life overall, the holistic life, to tell us which dimensions are affected, what leads to vulnerability. So this focus on lived experience is just across all methods, whether it be quantitative or qualitative or action oriented or data collection, more like conventional research oriented. So this is at the core. And now let's talk about data. So, whoops. Wow, those were supposed to be there and they were supposed to fade away, but here it is, all of it. So we have both quantitative and qualitative data. If you might remember, our first objective is focusing on indoor environmental quality. So for that, we're collecting temperature, relative humidity, particulate matter 2.5, and carbon dioxide. And we have Fitbits for health metrics. You'll see here that we have two different sensors. So even choosing which sensor is suitable for different buildings, because we actually, working at multiple sites, we have some subsidized public housing buildings. We also have SROs, which are single room occupancy hotels. I'm not sure if they translate to other cities that people are tuning in from here, but in Vancouver, we call them the last resort before homelessness or the first resort after homelessness. These are really old buildings where it's just a tiny room that a tenant has with shared bathroom, shared kitchen, really not great conditions, but still a place of shelter. So we have some research happening in SROs. We also are in a women's transitional home, as well as also some private housing as well, private subsidized housing, but they are all multi-unit residential buildings. None of them are single detached homes. This also means that we have different demographics of people. So we have seniors, yes, of course, in all of them, but we also have people who are previously unhoused very recently. We have people who are very recently incarcerated. And SROs, for example, do not have Wi-Fi infrastructure even, and tenants in these buildings certainly do not have Wi-Fi nor even cell phones sometimes. So that means that some sensors that use Wi-Fi to upload data are just completely not an option. So at the very left here, this is our more expensive sensor that has like a display screen. You can interact with it. These are in homes where Wi-Fi is there. And this other one, it's simpler. It doesn't measure air pollution. These are in places where there is no Wi-Fi. And also these are battery operated because SROs also do not have many outlets. So we couldn't plug these in. So we really had to think about the environment in which people live. So again, this is where like you build a relationship first and scope out where we will be working rather than picking the sensor first and then going in to say, we're going to use these or we can't use those sensors at all. And the Fitbits have been fine because we are purchasing all of these and giving them. That said, Fitbits do have to connect to a cell phone. So again, when people don't have their own cell phones, or if they are older and are not as digitally literate, technologically literate, that means we have had to provide our project phones. Also, many of our senior tenants are Chinese. So that means I am not ethnically Chinese. We have had to hire RAs with the language abilities and translate all materials. So there have been nitty-gritties like that sounds tedious and small, but without those details, none of this would actually happen because nothing could be communicated. So these are all, small lessons, but really, I think, pivotal lessons that we have been learning. In addition, we have qualitative data, of course. So we have what's called an energy and security survey. And energy and security is the work of my postdoc mentor, Dr. Diana Hernandez. And it really just means people's ability to meet everyday household energy needs, whether that be thermal comfort or cooking, or lighting your home. And she already has this survey set out, but we catered it to fit our local context. So for example, none of our housing here, the public housing has gas stoves, but because Dr. Hernandez is in New York, a lot of it was gas, so we had to change those questions, but that was already a standard survey that existed. The indoor environmental quality sensor use survey. So this one we developed ourselves because we wanted to see if people actually interacted with these sensors, if they were paying attention to their environments, because that tells us something about how they cope. How do they determine that they might be at risk and act. And then, like we said, if for buildings that have cooling rooms, we were interested in whether they actually use them. So a use survey. And photo voice, where people take photos and then talk about them. Because that kind of gives a richer texture to the interviews where they can point at something to say, this is what I experienced. These are what prominently come to mind when I think about heat or smoke. And then we have just regular interviews and focus groups, policy scans. And so I think it's called FOIA in the States. Here it's Freedom of Information. So we are requesting information from the province. So one of our major electric provider, BC Hydro, has in collaboration with the province, has rolled out like a free air conditioner provision program. And we're actually interested in how these applications get processed because a lot of people are actually denied. So we have requested FOI for this, and we have so much data that we are working through right now. So this is a snapshot of our data. So with all that, what are the lessons currently being learned? Okay, so one, I'm grappling with this question of how to decide what findings are important. We are getting so much data, and obviously we want to work with it all, but it's hard to really determine what and how to get from a participant's account to an interpreted finding. So to walk you through this, we get a participant's account, and then we have like an initial observation of it. So and I'll walk through an example on the next slide. So let's deal with an interview transcript, for example. If we get a participant's account that they're not running an air conditioner, and then the observation is that it's because they are in poverty and they cannot afford it, then that will become a code in qualitative analysis. And then while we're coding, obviously we as researchers, we also have thoughts as we're going through this process. So especially if we have run the interview ourselves, we are contextualizing this code in the broader interview and what we know of the participant already. So if we know, for example, for this participant, know that they are a tenant and they have tensions with the landlord, and the landlord pays for utilities. So utilities are actually included in the rent, but there's like subtle pressure from the landlord to not use that much utilities. Then, and there's a power dynamic, of course. Then we know that, so we will note that at the same time as coding. And mind you, this is Vancouver, where there's a massive housing crisis in terms of affordability, availability, security. So that type of landlord-tenant dynamic is abundant, unfortunately. And then we also, of course, because we have done interviews with multiple participants, we are comparing across the participants as well as within. So across participants is obvious, what are they experiencing in comparison to others in different buildings, say. But for within, what I mean here is that we have data from this unit, not just in terms of interviews and the qualitative accounts, but we also have indoor environmental quality data. So we have some quantitative data. So, and I'll talk about this more when integrating quant and qual data. But we're trying to make sense of their qualitative accounts with keeping in mind the quantitative data that we know about their environment at the same time. And then we're also, by the time we have done many of these, we're looking for emerging patterns. So, not just like the frequency of how many times a code might occur, but we're thinking about things like, when does this happen? Like, for whom does this happen? Is it more for people who live alone, for people who are more low income, for Chinese senior tenants more so? Like, are there cultural factors here? Under what conditions? So these are the questions that we are asking to identify patterns. And then that's how we get to a theme, arrive at a theme. So, for example, we find that this is a theme. Cooling is constrained by housing conditions, or another theme might be cooling is constrained by landlord-tenant dynamic. So this is, I really have to think about how we get to here, because in a way, this is a linear process written out like this, but I think it's actually a lot of iterative steps. You might have a theme and then you might go back to the codes, and so it's a lot messier than it actually looks here. So to walk through an example, when someone tells us, I just don't use the AC because I'm worried about the electricity bill. Initially, this might get coded as energy cost, but as we saw some similar accounts like across interviews, we started asking, is this only about affordability? Obviously this is about affordability, yes, but what else is happening here? Then we might notice things like connections to landlords' rules, housing conditions, the participants' knowledge about cooling. Like, do they only think that mechanical cooling is the only way to cool down? And people's sense of like what they are allowed to do, what they are able to do, even outside their homes. So this is how this like descriptive account starts becoming like an analytical process. And then, of course, there's as I said, the quantitative data, the IEQ data with the qualitative data. So that's our second lesson currently being learned right now, integrating quant and qual data. So aligning, again, so this is my best attempt at actually like explaining what's happening in my head right now. We are aligning data at the participant's home level and at the temporal level where possible. So say we are looking at an acute heat event because we're trying to do these photo voice interviews during a heat event. We will look at the sensor and Fitbit measurements during that same week. So we can have a sense of like what the IEQ was like while they were talking. And then we're, of course, looking for convergence and divergence. So, are they telling us about sleep difficulty? And we also see that the sensor data tells us that it was really hot. Then, that's confirming of what they are experiencing. Or we might see a divergence. So, we might see moderate temperatures but then they are also expressing at the same time real extreme discomfort. So what that actually could tell us, and this has happened many times. So for example, in months like May, where it's seasonal temperatures, but in these multi-unit residential building housings, it's actually quite hot inside when outdoor temperatures are still quite moderate. Or their housing is not, their units are not cooling down for some reason. So looking for convergence, divergence. And then we will look at one part of the data set to ask questions of another. So we might see really high PM 2.5 data in the sensors, and then we might look through the interviews, but there was no smoke event, say. It was a perfectly fine time. But then we might look at the interviews to see what may explain this pattern. So the interview might tell us that they were cooking a lot, or that they burnt toast or something. And then, of course, this is always happening to contextualize. So again, like the interview excerpt, when someone tells us that they're not running the AC, we will ask why, we'll go into further inquiry through the interviews. And also, within qualitative data itself, yes, there's integrating quant and qual, but I think there's also like integrating qualitative survey data with qualitative interview data. So there are many layers of this integration happening. And then, of course, I think what's really important is that when we go to present these findings, that they are presented together rather than being like, this is the sensor data and here's the qualitative data. I think we need to weave these together as a fulsome story. What I didn't mention actually is that this project is international. So we have our Vancouver branch here. We also have kind of similar things happening in Barcelona and New York. So this is an international, huge project. And each city is kind of doing different things, but with the same goal of looking at senior tenants, health and heat, and social inequities. It is also transsectoral, which means that we have academics and researchers, of course. We also have community partners, we have policymakers, health authorities, all these different people. But even within academic researchers, we have engineers, sociologists like myself, human geographers, epidemiologists. There's a lot of people from multiple perspectives. So it's really hard to actually come to a consensus about what good research looks like, what even rigor looks like. So rigor to a qualitative researcher versus a quantitative researcher just means different things. And what does it mean to be responsive to community versus responsive to a crisis might also look different depending on where you're coming from. How we think of community relevance might also be different. What we consider as theoretical contribution might also be different. So these are questions that we're currently grappling with. There's also, of course, institutional differences. We actually find that our European colleagues have just like different approaches to carrying out a grant, and that's been a big learning. And I'm also just an early career researcher myself, so it just, yeah, feels like drinking from a fire hose at times. So I guess that's more the meta level challenge right now. And this is a 4-year project and we still have 2 years left. So I imagine this will be ongoing, and I don't mean to frame this in a negative way. I think these are generative questions to ask, and especially as academia, I think just the world needs more interdisciplinary and transsectoral work. I think these are important to think about. And then we're really noticing that this timeline, this has caused interesting dilemmas. So I think there's a really interesting tension between fast and slow. So I do think the conventional understanding that I have at least encountered is that slow is always better and fast in terms of working with community partners, and that fast community work is extractive. I don't think that's as simple as that. I don't think slow means inherently ethical, and I don't think fast is also inherently bad. Obviously, there are just bad ways to do each, but there are times where community partners want to go faster than the university. And there are things where the university itself will slow the process down. So I have some examples here. Obviously from the administrative side, there are many ways in which the institution can slow things down. But then there are also like institutional pressures like grant deadlines, knowledge translation timelines, productivity needs, like merit reports that academics have to fill out annually. So there are different pressures. At the same time, community, obviously, their building trust rapport takes time. Organizational decision making for bigger community groups obviously also takes time. But when there are immediate crises like heat events hit or smoke events hit without much warning, obviously, then there are immediate needs that we need to respond to. And tenants, of course, obviously also have immediate needs. There are also political opportunities that pop up. So for tomorrow, for example, we're meeting with a senator who reached out to us because they're writing a white paper. They told us about this on Monday. And obviously we're doing this research for exactly that reason, to inform policy. And we really had to mobilize in the last like 2 days to prepare for this meeting tomorrow. But we also want to involve community there. So there are multiple needs, spontaneous needs, advocacy needs that give us pressure to go fast. So all to say, I don't think there is one right research pace. I think it means just staying nimble, and that's obviously also hard, especially during the school year when we're all busy teaching as well, and there are multiple temporalities to navigate. And then finally, so when research meets people's actual lives, I know this kind of sounds nebulous, but I'll give some examples. So protocol says one thing, ethical, our ethics research, ethics application says one thing, that will carry it out this way, people's lives say another. Our ethics board, for example, really didn't want us to like touch anything in participants' homes. But when we are there in person, many of them are senior tenants, and like this one senior wanted us to put up blinds because she knows nobody else and she doesn't really have help. And we're obviously not going to say no. And these blinds are to block out blinds as light and heat. Sometimes like some of the RAs did dishes for participants, and there are blurry borders there. But it's also been interesting to talk about this with students, because obviously it is important there are reasons why REB processes exist, but then talking about what that actually looks like on the ground. There's like operational ethics, and then there's REB ethics. They're not mutually exclusive, of course, and in an ideal case scenario they overlap. There has been that. And another case has been that when we started this project, one of our partners is Health Canada, so Department of Health equivalent, a federal body here in Canada. And they initially wanted to exclude people who smoke indoors in their units, because that would render all PM 2.5 data moot. But people who signed up, and we did ask for initial screening who smokes, and most of the participants smoke. And that just reflects the reality of the demographic who live in these subsidized housing buildings. And yes, for data purpose, it would be good to have a pure home where there is no cigarette smoke or cannabis smoke in the home. But if we really wanted to document the reality that excluding these people would mean that that's not really the reality of these homes. So we ultimately decided, okay, let's get rid of that criteria. Smokers can also join. So this does mean that some of these units the PM 2.5 data is just sky high always, and it's just smoke data. But that's the reality that we had to work with. And of course, people's schedules, housing situations change, health circumstances change. We've had 2 participants pass away, and we've had to those were hard moments. There are also competing priorities of participants, communities, organizations. These things pop up, and just operationally things look different than what we set out to do. And heat, what I mean by this here, people don't necessarily experience heat exposure in a neat way. Heat is not the only thing that's happening in their lives. It might really deviate from what we thought we were going to find, and staying open to all possibilities. And I think that again comes back down to like really focusing on people's lived experience as a whole, and not just about heat and smoke. And I was going to mention the smoke thing here. Protocol would have been to screen out smokers, but we adapted. And so Flexibility, I think understanding that as part of doing rigorous research in lived experience research, community engaged research has been really a core lesson rather than understanding that as a departure from rigor or departure from being ethical. Yeah, so I will leave it there. These are 3 reports public facing that we currently have out from different parts of our project so far. Um, yeah, check it out. This is also part of the UBC Center for Climate Justice, and yeah, and I'm really, yes, I recognize that there will be questions from me, but I'm also really just curious if there are other researchers in the room who have similar stories to share. Yeah, thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Yoon. This is super insightful, I think really informative to the folks who are on the qualitative side of things that want to do this type of work, because often in some of these population centers, we don't get these qualitative insights, I think, as frequently as we ought to. So just hearing you talk about it and understanding how it can inform different types of the quantitative work that some of us do, and how large a role this type of very descriptive and rich qualitative work can have, I think is always encouraging to me. So I very much appreciate it. Um, I think we'll shift into the Q&A. I'll do my best to moderate, and I see some that have come in on the chat already. I do encourage folks, if you're in the room and are able to and comfortable to turn your cameras on. And if you have a question, to go ahead and use the raise your hand function, just so we can see faces and continue to have a conversation. All the letters of your names are wonderful, but we also want to see your faces and expressions as well, if you're willing. Um, on that note, I am curious, let's see here. Lori, I'll let you go ahead and kick off since you've had a couple good kind of foundational questions in the chat.
I appreciate that, and I have to leave a little early, so I'm really excited. And there's a related question in the chat by Anna Gardner. So I was wondering about recruitment. How did you decide what buildings you're going to include in your sample and respondents within the buildings? And then Anna had asked about just building rapport and trust because you collected so much personal data. So how did you find and recruit people?
Yeah, so thank you. There are recruitment for different groups look different. So, but in terms of how to decide, we knew that the core focus of our project was seniors, health, and social inequities. So focusing on social inequity meant that we were going to multi-unit residential buildings, subsidized housing buildings. And what also helped was that BC Housing, which is the public housing here in the province, was already interested in research like this. So they had already formed a relationship with Health Canada. They had reached out to our federal health department to see if research like this could be done. So I actually benefited from that relationship already there. And also because BC Housing was the site of many deaths during the heat dome. So there was a need there. So multi-unit residential buildings for the focus, subsidized multi-unit residential buildings for the focus on poverty. And again, with similar focus on social inequities, we looked at different areas of Vancouver and asked ourselves, like, where are the needs? We also looked at the coroner's report from the heat dome to say, where are the areas in which people died? And from there, we reached out to community, like neighborhood houses, they're called, they're so community centers, to see what connections there were to seniors groups. And yeah, the recruitment, it was slow. It was, yeah, having initial conversations with like senior neighborhood houses to see if they would be interested. And then honestly, a lot of in-person visits. There's a lot of bike rides to these groups. I think they actually do go a long way, and to have in-person chats. And it wasn't, right off, starting off with that saying, do you want to participate in this project? It was more listening to like what's going on, what their needs are. And then actually word of mouth helped. So they would tell other groups, and then actually we had people like reaching out to us. And also, so that's like 2 different methods. And then we have some research assistants themselves who One, for example, was a volunteer with an SRO group, and she knew that there was a need. So yeah, we had like an insider connection that helped us connect with SROs. Yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, Anna, I see Anna's here. Maybe the trust building, if you want
Oh,
to talk
yeah.
a bit more. Anna, if you had anything to add.
Yeah, the trust building, I think this is an ongoing process. I initially had a slide where it was like a linear arrow saying building rapport, connection, and then research question. And then like there were just squiggly lines everywhere to say it actually just continues back and forth. Um, I think it takes time. I don't know if anybody here is Zadie Smith fans. She's an author. She has a quote that I really love, which is like, time is how you spend your love. And that has really manifested. We have had to spend a lot of time going to these partners, sites, buildings, to like actually show literally, physically, our commitment and interest. And it also meant like being really upfront about not being able to, we're not actually improving their housing conditions. So I think being really upfront that that's not what we're promising, that we're doing our best to collect data for like accurate diagnoses. I think that honesty kind of like broke the fourth wall in a way. And so they like saw us more as human, to be like, oh, they're researchers who don't know everything, who are doing their best. Um, Participant remuneration definitely helps, obviously. And with every visit, so whenever we do field work, we are literally entering people's homes. So there's a lot of calling, scheduling, coordinating, and all of that work is being done by student research assistants. And we do like as research staff here, rigorous training for just how to navigate different situations, how to talk to people respectfully, but not like in a patronizing way, So yeah, there's a lot of like student training, but I think it's also just like showing up as humans first and foremost. We also hosted many events like info sessions, like multiple, so people could voluntarily come to learn about the research and ask any questions they wanted. So again, a lot of time spent there. Um, yeah, but it's an ongoing process. When we have research findings, we'll like do presentations there, or people have like requested reports in different languages. So we also like try to get ahead of these needs. So when we like clock that someone needs this report in Farsi, then we'll try to like make other materials in Farsi so they feel like seen as like an individual and not just one of the participants of many. I think it's little things like that. But yeah, ongoing process.
Thank you. If nobody else has a question, or Anna, do you have a follow-up to any of that?
Um, Not necessarily. Sorry, I'm in a shared space, so I don't want to talk too much. Um, I was wondering about the different forms of data because I have done some recruitment in the field, and I find it hard sometimes to get people to agree to survey data. So I was interested in sort of the
Oh
like
yeah.
Fitbit sensors in the home. Did you get additional pushback to that, or were people pretty open to it?
Um, People were pretty open to it. And I think honestly, I think it was remuneration. We're giving like $100 basically for activity each time. And this is again where funding is really helpful. I know that's a really crass answer, but that has been the reality. That said, this is not part of this project. I have another project with participants with schizophrenia, and they have actually been really reluctant to take up Fitbits, even the sensors. And we actually had to pick a different sensor that does not have a screen and more like inconspicuous looking, it's all black because it feels less triggering for some people who have auditory or visual hallucinations. But for participants with schizophrenia who are concerned about Fitbits, like tracking them, and it is literally tracking them. Again, this was where like frank honesty was helpful, where yes, like it is tracking them, but we also had to think carefully about wording. So we didn't use words like surveillance. We said it is logging your sleep. It's not, so words like monitoring, surveillance, we stayed away from. So yeah, paying attention to like wording like that helped, remuneration helped. And then yeah, being like, yes, this data does go to Google. But we have project phones here that have your alias. It's not your actual personal account. We like made a fake project account. So Google does have this data, but it can't associate it with you as the individual. So coming up with measurements like, or yeah, steps like that has been helpful. But we have one participant who still said no. So it's not going to work for everyone. Yeah,
Thank you.
of course.
Great. I I think Lori posed a nice question about the kind of institutional starts and stops that this type of work demands. And so I'll just read her question out loud because I think it's a good one. So do you experience tension in terms of professional timeline when you're doing work like this? I don't know how many folks in the room are early career scholars. Give a thumbs up or a hand clap or something if we have early career folks in the room, if you're willing to share. Um, I know that there's often a desire to do this really rich, wonderful, community engaged work and also the pressures of the tenure track timeline, right? Can you talk about how you're balancing that and if you found strategies or ways to get institutional support for these types of projects that
Yeah,
need your love and your time?
it's so hard, and I don't think I can answer this until if hopefully when I get tenure. I just went up for renewal. I will be applying for tenure probably next year. I actually do feel quite lucky in I think UBC does recognize the merits of like community engaged research and even like public facing reports alongside peer reviewed publications. I think there are um, yeah, like organizational level shifts, even if gradual, to that. I also actually I'm in the School of Kinesiology, which is heavily natural science oriented, biomechanics, physiology. Um, but even within our department, I think there has been effort to recognize the work that sociocultural kinesiology scholars like myself do. Um, but yeah, I'm careful to say this because I don't know the results just yet. I do know that when I fill out my like merit report every year, I kind of have to qualify. Yes, like I have one publication from this massive project, but this is because getting here took months. Even like building trust took months. So my hunch is that these qualifications are only kind of coming from sociocultural folks. So yeah, that is a meta level extra effort that I recognize we are making. But I think on the whole, it's not, it is being recognized, but there's extra effort to make that happen.
Yeah, I think that that's a satisfying answer, even if you don't have all of the data yet on
Yeah, I
if it worked out. I'm
don't.
sure that it will. But it's an impressive project nonetheless. Like it has such further reaching implications than some of the like standard metrics of a tenure track might have. So I want to encourage you there in case you're feeling discouraged ever. Um, I had another question. Maybe I wanted to make sure we got that professionalization question in there as well, but I had a question kind of going back to the range of data that you have, not so much in sources, but in cases. And so Lori posed the question on how do you think about this data uh, on like within case comparison? And so do you look at people's quantitative or qualitative data about how their time was when there wasn't heat stress, so like a mild week,
Oh yeah,
and how
totally.
that changes compared to their time during a high intensity heat week. And then given that the sample is it seems like focused so much on subsidized housing uh, respondents and units, do you do any type of the same research with folks who are in unsubsidized places
Right,
or who maybe don't fit that socioeconomic profile so much to have
totally.
just another comparison group?
Yeah. So two separate questions. So the first one, we are looking at like temporally non-heat wave times, non-smoke times. So these sensors, I should have said, have been in these people's homes for 2 years. Actually, we just took them out from the multi-unit residential buildings. So we have 2 years, 24 months. So 2 summers, 2 spring, 2 fall, 2 winters, and we do have that. In terms of the subsidized versus non, We do not have that data. We only have comparison across different types of subsidized housing buildings. That said, when we look at epidemiological reports, we know that these deaths and injuries are happening more in people in low-income households. These death reports, coroner's reports, don't actually state the type of housing. So, we can't actually say that these low-income folks who have died were all in subsidized housing. We don't have the evidence to say that. That said, I think anecdotally and what we see across, just what we see happen, we can assume that a lot of these are more likely to happen in multi-unit residential buildings, subsidized. So no, but we're kind of like taking evidence from other forms of evidence to justify our selection.
That's great. Thank you. I could talk all day. I love housing. I want to talk about like the meaning of housing and the importance of home, right? Versus just the protective factor of it. But I want to not be the only one talking. Does anybody else have any other questions that have popped up? Or I'm reading through the chat right now to look for other folks. But if you have a question, go ahead and shout it out. Otherwise, I'll ask another one in a second here. Okay, it looks like it might be me, if that's okay, Liv. You and I can have a chat.
It's all good. We also don't have to go all the way to 10.
Sure, yeah. I had a question on, where was it? Maybe going back to some of my earlier comments on if we want to like reduce these findings or things that are sticking out to you as interesting or important, if we want to reduce them to like a variable, are there variables, quote unquote, out there that could be measured in some type of survey or quantitative way that you see in other data sets that are either underutilized or like have potential to be used as like in larger surveys or health studies or population surveys that would capture some of your findings that otherwise are not being looked at. And so I'm wondering like if there are particular things about housing units that you found are really important, or particular things about rent or landlord dynamics that are not captured just by the like, homeowner versus non-homeowner status. Yeah, anything that like I'm thinking about ways to leverage these qualitative insights in like in apply them broadly through the like rich quantitative data that's out there in HRS and all the other big surveys.
Yeah, I don't think my answer is going to be satisfying to you, but one thing that has become really prominent, and I doubt this, well, I actually don't know if this exists, I've never looked into it. Social connection and social isolation has turned up to be really prominent in the people that we work with. I don't know how we would measure that quantitatively. Maybe it's like the number of people that a participant sees in a week, and maybe that data does exist. I would find that really interesting to see. Especially for folks with schizophrenia, for example, who are very isolated. And the coroner's report from the BC Heat Dome does show, as I showed here, over half the people who died alone, and they lived alone. And what we are finding when we just casually have chats with people, not many have next of kin or friends even that they see, so they're like asking us for help to do tasks. So yeah, social connection, social isolation, if that exists as quantitative data somehow. And, we are asking questions about that qualitatively, but that would be really interesting. Yeah.
I think that's super insightful, super helpful. So many studies, I think, or data sets are focused on either like the physical conditions or the individual health and well-being conditions, like medical comorbidities and things like that, especially with aging folks. But the social side of it is fundamental, I think, partly because housing is like a setting for social interaction, right? And so if you're living alone, you don't have some of the
told us like my room is too hot, so I don't invite people over,
So it's isolating in and of itself, the experience of the heat. That's also encouraging to me because there are lots of great time use data, at least in the US. And if I understand them correctly, they often have like, who were you doing this activity with? Or like this hour that you indicated you went for a walk, were you by yourself or were you with other people?
Yeah.
And also have um, kinship connection data
Right.
and within or out of household data connected to that. So there's the American Time Use Survey is the one that I'm thinking of that has this really, really rich, really complicated data structure.
Hmm.
But I'm on a project that's trying to look at, how people change their behaviors in response to heat. And so we're using
Oh,
this behavior
interesting. Yeah.
data.
I'll look for something equivalent in Canada. Yeah, that'd be really interesting.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know if they have a similar type of survey in Canada,
I
but
hope
you can
so.
look into it.
Yeah.
And then there's also like, social network data, peer network, like, network analysis type stuff, but it's not always so geographically specific and wouldn't have the associated environmental exposure data to it, which is the perennial problem when you want to start thinking about the environment and how it changes people's outcomes and interactions. So, um, yeah, let's see here. Do anybody have any last lingering questions? I'm happy to give everybody those extra 3 minutes to take some deep breaths before they have to do their next thing. Um, okay. I think I'll probably, yeah, I think I'll probably end a minute early. I want to thank everybody for coming. Thank everybody for sticking around and listening for the Q&A and in your participation. This was really great. Dr. Yoon, this is exactly kind of what we're looking for here at Cache of like, what is the practice of this research, right? The findings are always great and shiny, but the practice of getting them is never great and shiny. It's always messy. And so seeing the messiness, seeing the ways that you make those decisions when you encounter those hurdles is really wonderful and helpful. So those of you who can, let's give a wonderful round of applause and a thank you to Dr. Yoon. Um, and I may, Liv, if you're able to stick on for a few more minutes, I may just pick your brain about one more thing.
Yeah.
And then anybody else who wants to stick around for that is more than welcome to. So
Thank
yeah,
you so
thanks for
much,
coming,
everyone.
everyone.
Yeah, thank you for sticking around. I appreciate it.